definitions, they all have something in common, right? Which is treat operations as software engineering. I think that kind of speaks to really what an SRE is about. It's not about SLAs and SLOs and SLIs. A lot of people think that's critical. I think those are tools for you to be able to introspect your system and say what is failing, what is not reliable, what is really impacting servicing my customers, and then using automation and software engineering principles to tackle that problem.
Hello and welcome to the Cloud Career Mentor Show. Our guest today is Jamie Phillips, and he has deep experience working in the cloud industry. He's worked as a cloud engineer, DevOps engineer, solutions architect, and now he's the senior site reliability engineer at the NBA. Jamie, I'm so happy to have you here. And today we're going to jump into conversations about, SRE, DevOps, the difference between them and all of that good stuff. But I noticed that you actually started off your career studying geography. You studied geology at university, then you went on to do a master's in geography. So I'm curious as to how your career has transitioned from a background in geography to what you're doing now.
It's kind of an interesting story. So I started college as a geology undergraduate. My senior year of geology, I took a GIS class, so Geographic Information Systems class, and as an upper level elective. And I decided, I want to go to grad school to do computer mapping, basically, to do GIS, because geologists are kind of old school. We carry around compasses, we do paper maps. And so I really thought like GPS, GIS is the way to go. And so my first semester of grad school, one of the professors in the GIS group there said, I need people to take my introduction to programming class because I don't have enough students. And he's like, I think you would like it. So I took my first programming class, and then I took a geodatabase design class. And after that, I just started doing it, and took a couple of internships doing programming. And then when I started looking for my first job, I was like, well, developers make a little bit more money than just being a GIS person. So that's what I look for, were jobs. And then I got my first job in tech as a GIS developer. And then from there, just I think my geology background kind of leveraged my systems thinking and big picture and being able to see patterns at a different scale. And from there, I just kind of progressed in my career. And then, about 2014, there's this thing called the cloud. I was super interested in it and started using Azure at a job that I had. And from there, I was like, Terraform's kind of cool. So I started using Terraform in about 2017. And then decided I wanted to be a cloud engineer. And from there, that kind of morphed into doing SRE work.
No, that's really interesting. And I think that's a sort of common theme I see with people who are, successful in the cloud industry. There's always that sense of curiosity where, you notice, oh, there's this Terraform thing, let me try it out. Oh, there's this cloud thing, let me try it out. And sort of building on those skills over time is the best way to do it because you're following your curiosity in a way. So I know you've worked, like I mentioned earlier, as a cloud engineer, DevOps, solutions architect. And I think these are, aspects of the cloud industry that get a lot of attention. But I feel like SREs or site reliability engineer isn't really on the radar for a lot of people because I think maybe it's not as flashy as solutions architect. I don't know. So, because you have experience as an SRE, what does an SRE do? Like, what does an SRE professional do? What's their main roles and responsibilities? Are you interested in getting your first cloud job? If you answered yes, then I have a free guide just for you. This free guide walks you through a proven step-by-step process to help you get that first cloud job. It walks you through the 3 simple steps you can take today to make yourself highly employable. The link is in the description below, so make sure you download it now if you're interested. All right, let's get back to the show.
Oh, that's such a loaded question. It varies, right? Like, so I didn't mean that in a bad way, by the way. So like it just varies. It depends on where you work, what that definition is. Some places, SREs are probably more operations focused, And then in some places, SREs are maybe a little bit more DevOps slanted. And so I think the general theme is, though, that I think of it like full stack IT. You really have to be able to do some software development. You have to be able to do some operations work. You have to be able to understand networking at a certain level, right, to troubleshoot problems. So SRE is kind of all over the board, and I see it as more of an implementation of DevOps, of the
Mm,
culture of DevOps, the mentality of DevOps. And if you
yes.
go and look at definitions, they all have something in common, right? Which is treat operations as software engineering. I think that kind of speaks to really what an SRE is about. It's not about SLAs and SLOs and SLIs. A lot of people think that's critical. I think those are tools for you to be able to introspect your system and say what is failing, what is not reliable,
Mm,
what is really impacting servicing my customers, and then using automation and software engineering principles to like tackle that problem. You know,
yeah.
really dig in and see, is it a software problem? Can I fix it? Or is it more of a networking problem? Can we fix that? If something keeps continually happening, can we automate that problem away? And so it
Yeah.
long answer, but it's kind of all over the board, but it takes all of those skills to put them together.
Yes, no, I agree. And in my mind, I usually see SRE as a form of maintenance and optimization in a way where, I think the main responsibility, like you say, is make sure things don't fail. And, that involves sort of monitoring to know when a failure happens, putting automations or systems in place to ensure that either a failure doesn't happen or if it does happen, then, we get notified quickly, preventing it from happening. And I greatly associate it with sort of site uptime. But like you say, these are also things that, DevOps engineers are involved in, or they might be responsible for. For example, when you're creating infrastructure, you might want it to be auto scaling, right? So if the server goes down, it automatically comes back up. And I think one of the reasons this is important is because a lot of the times people ask me like, oh, do I become a DevOps? Do I become a cloud engineer? Do I become SRE? And my general answer is they all leverage similar things. Like once you understand the foundations, like you were saying with networking, a bit of programming, how like the system works, like, what services you can use, you can kind of apply those to whatever the situation demands. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's the key of it. Like we've I've been on projects where we've having issues, and as a site reliability engineer, knowing how to code, I've been able, and especially my background's .NET, and I've worked mainly in a lot of shops that have .NET, so it's easy for me to go in and say, let's debug this problem, let's do some monitoring, let's do some memory profiling, and I can really get in with the developers and bring my expertise there into the conversation to be like, oh, we're running out of memory, or we're having this problem. And
Mm,
a classic thing I like to talk about is like in Azure, we're running an app service. Azure App Service has a limit on the number of TCP connections you can have. So a lot of people don't know that, but how you find out is you're not handling disposing of your HTTP client correctly in your .NET code, and then you run out of TCP connections and your website starts
mm.
failing. And so being able to connect all those pieces together and bring that all in, I think is a key skill of being an SRE and kind of having that. I like that phrase, inch knowledge, having knowledge an inch deep but a mile wide, and then having an
Mm,
area where you go really deep. So
yeah.
you don't have to be a network engineer to be an SRE, but you should have a common understanding of networking, at a minimum to be able to really, I think, excel in the role.
I think that makes so much sense. And I think this is even more true, I'd say, at a junior level as well, because things come up, you need to be able to make the connections because the more senior you become, just naturally you pick up all of that stuff. A lot of the people who listen are juniors or people who are actually looking to break in. And I wanna throw an idea to you, and I just wanna get a feel for your thoughts, right? So I'd say traditionally, in my career as a cloud engineer or as a DevOps engineer, I've been primarily focused on, building pipelines. I've been primarily focused on building infrastructure. And what I realized is that there's sort of two aspects to infrastructure. Aspect one is just build it, right? Actually, let's say there's three phases. Phase one is I just want the thing to work, right? Just build it, not worrying about anything else. Just, okay, phase one, is it working in the cloud? Cool. Phase two is when you start thinking about other things like, okay, is this in line with best practices? Is the security right? Is it cost optimized? All of that. And then I feel like phase three is the monitoring and alerting side of things where, it's not as glamorous as, yeah, just building it and figuring out all these things, but it's more in like, okay, how do we know what happens if this error goes off? What error should we choose? Looking at the sort of monitoring metrics, like, oh, is it performing as it should be? And I found where I failed is the sort of that third phase, getting into the detail and incremental progress. Because I get bored. I'm like, okay, I just want to build it. Would you say that's maybe a lot of what an SRE does? Looking at edge cases and making sure that the system is robust, whereas, maybe a DevOps person is primarily concerned with building pipelines, making sure the sort of the big picture works, the functionality is there. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's an excellent point. I think that's an excellent observation. Yeah, that's the part that gets overlooked. And I think, it kind of waits till the end. And sometimes you need to have that conversation at the start so you can plan to do those things. Because if you don't put in instrumentation, you don't have decent logging in your app, or you don't have any way to collect metrics at the start, it's tricky though, right? Like it is the part that seems to get missed, or sometimes people take the approach of taking everything, and when you collect everything, then you don't really look at it because it's too much, or you don't tweak and hone, and then most of the teams moved on to another project, right? Because you got to ship stuff,
Yeah.
and so that constant improvement of the software is a hard one. And yeah, monitoring and observability in general, like metrics and stuff, you get lots of philosophies on that and lots of controversies, and so it's a hard thing to tackle. And it does get put off at the end, and then sometimes it's either you got too much coming in that doesn't really add any value, or you don't know what to pay attention to. And another trend in that area that I've noticed is that, like, this would be something I would urge anybody kind of doing SRE work, or even developers, to think about, is your error messages. Making sure that if it's a common error that happens in your system and you expect it to happen, fine, log it. Just put something in there that says this is kind of expected, like expected error, blah, because X. Um,
Mm.
because I think lots of times that's just noise. You see all these 500s coming out of your service, and sometimes it's like, oh, it does that sometimes. And it's like, yes, but how do I know when there's a real one? But I think that just takes practice and time. And something that a project I've been working on lately, is using AI ops to do log analysis. So wasn't a big necessarily believer in AI ops. However, when you have millions of log files coming in a day, letting AI look for patterns and then surface those patterns to you, I think is another way to kind of like filter through the noise, because then you can focus on what the AI seems to think is important. And then you can do reinforcement training on whether yes, that's important, or no, it's not. And then you can start getting that noise out of the system. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's it's the part that waits till the end a lot of times, and you kind of got to plan for it at the start. And I think that's the hard part.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that's always the sort of push pull, where it's how much errors or how much logging are we going to alert for? Because like you say, there could be a lot of noise where, yeah, this thing has gone down, but is that actually important? So a simple example, right, is let's say you have a system that's, a virtual machine in Azure or AWS that's auto scaling. And let's say, because it's if an instance dies and a new one comes up, you don't really want to notify on that because, it's doing what it's supposed to. But there could come a time where it keeps doing it every 5 minutes and there's something deeper wrong and you want to be aware of that. So it's so interesting. There's so much nuance when it comes to alerting logging, monitoring, and maybe that's something we will go into in a separate conversation. But I just find that so fascinating because my instinct is kind of like, okay, let's get it working, let's get some simple logs in, but obviously there also needs to be that process of refinement of building on learnings, which, like you say, people forget because we all move on to the next project, and that's the interesting thing. So that's great. I think what I'd like to ask you as well, because you've mentioned some skills or technologies that are important. Could you maybe elaborate on what you think some core competencies are of an SRE? So, you mentioned programming, CI/CD. So maybe just talk a bit about that. Maybe give some examples to really help the listener visualize what you're saying.
Skills wise, I think understanding DevOps, the culture, is important. Tools come and go. Tools are situational. So understanding, like, knowing a tool, knowing a CI/CD server is I think is important. I think you need to know that because you're going to be using those to do things, and it doesn't matter which one they are because they're all the same. I know we'll get a bunch of people upset saying that they're all the same, but they all do the
Them.
same thing.
Yeah.
Um, knowing a programming language, I think that's critical. I think you can debate what language that is. I'm a .NET developer by trade. I do like PowerShell. I can write Bash if I have to. Um, that's hotly debated. I think Python though is pretty prevalent. It's a lot of places. Your company you work for is going to have data engineers. They're going to have data scientists. You're going to have to support them. They're going to speak Python. I think looking at the org that you work for and looking at where your developers are should really drive your language choice because then you can always lean on them to help you if it's a hard problem or if you have somebody that's out and stuff. So
Mm.
that also gives you a better understanding of what they're doing because I think if your developers are all using TypeScript, maybe you should write your IAC in TypeScript because then you have that common bond, you have that relationship, and they can always pick it up. So
Mm.
that's like a DevOps tip to me is if you're going to do IAC and you want to empower your developers to adopt IAC, then pick a language that your developers use. Don't pick a language that you want.
Yeah.
Um, be flexible there. So I think understanding databases like the big types of databases and how they work and how to use them. Uh, I can't say really if you're going to be an SRE, you got to know containers and Kubernetes. That's probably a hard requirement these days. And also knowing the cloud. Doesn't matter which cloud it is; they're all the same. Yet again, I'll get people all upset about that one. But
Mm.
an AWS Lambda is not much different than an Azure function, right? Like at the
Yeah.
end of the day, they do the same thing. Um,
Yeah.
so I think understanding that, and then picking the thing to really dive into. Like if you like AWS, then you probably want to look for an AWS shop, like because you look for somewhere that's like got a bunch of different stuff, and you're not willing to like be more moldable to that situation, then you're probably not going to be happy. And I think that's a big skill in general. Being an SRE is extremely flexible because the things I work on in a day is all over the place. Like my team, is in charge of DNS, so we do DNS changes, and then I could be writing some .NET code. I could be in AWS and then Azure the next day. So we're really kind of like all over the place. Um, and I think as an SRE, you're going to be like maybe you have to step in and help the DevOps team. Well, you need to
Mm.
know what they do.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say a specific skill. It's more about
Yes.
being a really good generalist,
Yeah,
which
no,
is
I agree. And even just to expand on that, I think when we're talking about what do you like .NET or Python, what I found is the ecosystem really matters. So for example, if you're interested in Azure, chances are the companies using Azure are Windows heavy just because of Azure's Microsoft. And so, programming language like .NET is probably really important. Understanding PowerShell scripting is very important. However, I've noticed that AWS it's more Linux heavy. And again, if you're on Azure, you can use Linux, and if you're on AWS, you can use Windows as well. But I just something I've noticed as a general rule. So it's like if you're more in the AWS, you'll probably learn Bash and Python. But I think what's really important is to learn one thing really well, because like you mentioned, Jamie, a lot of the times once you understand the concept, you can apply it to whatever situation you need. So, for example, once you understand how to create a pipeline in AWS or how to write a Lambda function in AWS, it's pretty much the same in the Azure version. You might need to learn the terminology and read a bit of documentation to understand some settings, but once you understand what it does and how it works, it's relatively simple to transfer skills. A little example to illustrate this: one of my friends, he's the CEO of a company that uses Alibaba Cloud, right? And he came up to me and he said, "Oh, my bill's really high. Can you help look at this?" And I'm primarily an AWS person, never even looked at Alibaba before, but I could tell that there's just general cloud cost saving things. So, for example, looking at provisioning, so looking at the metrics of like the virtual machine, is it provisioned to capacity? Is the CPU utilization only 2% on average? Like I can tell, okay, now you can reduce the instance size, reduce the block storage, reserve. So, like, even though the terminology might be different, a lot of the concept is the same across the various cloud providers. So, but yeah, I'd say pick something. I found Python to be easier. You could pick Python, you could pick .NET, you could pick Java or Go. Just pick a programming language, do some projects in it, get really good at it. Pick a cloud provider, do projects in it, get really good at it. And I think that's a really good way to sort of advance in one's career. What advice would you give to someone who wants to transition into an SRE role? So let's say, maybe they've done a bit of DevOps, or they've done, or maybe they're just starting out. They want to know, okay, what can I do? And this could be, I guess, a general cloud advice, if you want to do anything in cloud. But I'm curious, what advice would you give to someone who wants to transition into an SRE role?
I don't know. It's a tough one. I don't know if you can necessarily go directly into that role without like a previous life. And by that I mean, all right, have you been a developer for a year or two? Have you done operations for a year or two? Have you done IT support for a year or two? I think having that experience and getting exposed to lots of things that happen in production apps is really going to help you be an SRE, because a big chunk of the job everywhere I've been has been incident response. We're the people on call. We have to get in. You have to look at a system, figure out why it's not working. Maybe you have the
Mm,
devs helping you, maybe you don't. Maybe you have to page them. But you got to have that comfortability there with being able to just go at a problem and kind of figure it out, not be afraid to ask for help, right? Because most of these times they're time sensitive. So I think, knowing what you're kind of getting into, when you're looking to move to that role, are you comfortable being on call? Some people aren't, so maybe that's not maybe the best move. Um, however, you can, any job you're in, you should ideally you would be doing these things that an SRE does, right? Like reliability, a service that you're developing probably should be a priority. Understanding how to scale your system, uh, I think would be something that you could learn and practice. Monitoring, observability in general, like you can do those things as a developer, you can do those things as a DevOps engineer. And so building that kind of mentality and culture around things, and then automating tasks. That was the big driver for me with DevOps is we do all this. Like when I got into DevOps, I got interested in it in 2010. And it took me a while to kind of break into a role where I kind of made my own way there. But it was really about just automating things we do all the time. Like we spend an awful lot of time just waiting for things, for somebody to do something when it could really be self-service. We just have to have somebody write that automation so then to be able to click a button. So maybe you want to move into an SRE type role. You're thinking about monitoring and alerting. You're thinking about reliability of a site, and so maybe you automate a runbook. Maybe there's a problem, and you want the business to self-serve, rebooting the server or rebooting the service or whatever task it is that you need to do. And write you a Lambda, write you an Azure function, and you know, put a GUI on it and, lock it down to where they can't hurt themselves, but then they can sign in with credentials and like restart something or, uncache an image or whatever it is task wise that you have to do all the time as in the role that you're in, and then just automate it. And I think, that kind of self starting and like solving that problem reduces your workload. So then you can spend more time learning and developing the skills and focusing on the things that you think are important. And I think that's kind of missed a lot of times is like automation's key and you got to be
Mm.
comfortable doing it. So
Yeah, I agree. Automation is key, and it's funny because that's something that a lot of beginners shy away from because they think programming is really difficult, and it is. I remember when I was learning, like I tried to learn Java twice, didn't work out, and then I found Python, and I found it a lot easier. But yes, like you said, just finding things you can automate, finding simple things, you only need a couple of lines of code to solve. And even with your on-call comment as well, I remember early in my career, I had to do a lot of on-call work. And there's nothing like being woken up at 2 in the morning with a phone call and something's wrong, and you have to sort of figure out what it is. And yeah, I think almost with every cloud job, depending on what company you work on, you're probably going to do on call, and you should embrace that because that's just part of the learning. You get to think about things a lot differently. And I really like what you said about just being a self-starter, look at what needs to be done and figure out how to do it. I saw a really good quote on LinkedIn today. Someone was like, 90% of being a cloud engineer or solutions architect or troubleshooting issues is just believing you can do it. And if you believe you can do it, then you spend the time, do the research rather than just giving up and being like, oh, I don't know what it is. Just believing you can do it is a really good boost. Thanks a lot, Jamie, for taking the time to talk to us. I just like to give you the floor. If there's anything you want to point people towards, if people have questions, where's the best way they can contact you?
I would say the best way, phillipsj.net is my blog. I'm not as active as I used to be, but I have a lot of stuff there. I'm trying to get more active there. There's links to all the social stuff that I do, but I'm primarily on LinkedIn anymore. I do have a
Oh,
Mastodon account that I don't check. GitHub is another good place. If you can get a hold of me. So
awesome. Yeah, I had a look at the blog and it's a really good blog as well. I'd encourage anyone to check it out. And yeah, I'll pop all those links in the show notes. Thanks for your time, Jamie, and we'll talk soon.
yep. Thank you.